Well, hello there. How are you doing? Keeping well, I hope. Welcome to the Interaction Field series of live streams. These are a series of shows that explore the points that are raised in the book, The Interaction Field, which was written by the founder of Vivaldi, Erich Joachimsthaler, who is on the show today. So, as ever, we want you to get involved. Please give us your questions and your comments in the chat area. I'll be coming back into the show after about half an hour or so, and I will ask the questions on your behalf. So please ask away. It'd be lovely to get your questions. Today's a very special show because Erich's being interviewed by Jenny Rooney from Forbes. It means that you won't have to listen to my ridiculous accent for very much longer. Jenny is the communities director for all the C-suite networks at Forbes. She's the person who turned CMO Network into the powerhouse that it is today. She's interviewed hundreds of CMOs and CEOs, and just hearing that even yesterday, Simon Le Bon. So we are absolutely delighted that she's going to be doing that again today with Erich. So it's time for me to take a step back and to hand you over to Jenny. Hello, Jenny. I shall see you later on in the show.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Dave. Good to see you again, and welcome, everybody. It's great to be here. I am so pleased to have this conversation with Erich. Erich and I have known each other for quite some years now, and it's just fascinating to learn about his new book. We're going to be talking about that today. The interaction field. He's going to kind of break that down for us and certainly talk about it in terms of implications and relevance for C-suite executives, certainly CMOs, but really how companies collectively, their collective leadership need to be thinking about this concept as we move forward. Again, the book is called The Interaction Field, the revolutionary new way to create shared value for businesses, customers, and society. And I really want to dig into that concept of shared value. So without further ado, I'd love to bring Erich up to the virtual stage. Erich, how are you?
Hello. What did Dave refer to? Was the ridiculous accent mine or his? What? He said something about a ridiculous
Probably mine. I'm the odd man out here, so.
We all speak English, in sort of three different ways, I guess.
Absolutely. Well, listen, it's great to see you, Erich, as always.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you.
And before we get into it, listen, I know folks know you. You have such a rich history, so much achievement, but just in your own words, a few words around just your history, then quickly bring us up to this moment in time, sort of where you are at. I think this is your third book that you have published, if I'm not mistaken. So a little bit about you, Erich.
At my age, you don't want to talk about history because it's a long history. But Jenny, I back in the 90s, I thought that there was something special happening, and that is that the intangible asset value of the firm was very little, 10-15%, and the asset value of the firm was tangible. And I felt that brand was this way of capturing that intangible asset value. And I expected back then that the future will be such that the companies will be more and more, the value of companies be driven by that intangible asset value. If you look 2020, you see exactly what happens. Now it's just the reverse. The average S&P 500 companies, the average tangible asset value is about 15%, and intangible is 85%. So it was I was at the beginning of that movement, and from my little world, being in marketing and innovation and growth, I thought it was brand that was this one thing that could capture sort of that value. And so moving forward now, so many years, I wrote a book on innovation, and I felt like the problem there, I felt like, was people always look at innovation from the inside out, and they say, what are the jobs to be done over there of those consumers over there? And when you do that, you look at the world with your own capabilities, with your own asset, with your own belief system, and you don't see the biggest opportunities in plain sight. So that's why the book was called Hidden in Plain Sight. You can't see, even though it's right there. So I thought there's a new methodology that we developed of how do you see the consumer, how they really are and how they live. And so moving forward now, today, so about 6 years ago, there were two economists, French economists. I did my economist degree back in Germany many years ago. And these two economists, one of them is Jean Tirole. In 2014, they won the Nobel Prize for a paper that was also one of those papers, who would know about it. And the paper was written in 2004. And it described a new business model called a two-sided marketplace. And when they won the Nobel Prize, I said, oh, that's an interesting thought. And what I found when you looked at 2014 onward, during those 6 years, you find that something has happened now. And what has happened is that the world is increasingly more connected. Everything connects. Originally, if you think about in 95, Google and so forth helped us to find information and started building the search engine. It was connecting of information. There was one wave. And then what happens is, and Amazon, of course, says, hey, if you connect websites and information across websites, why not on one side of the website we put books? And that became e-commerce. So Amazon invented sort of, if you will, perfected the e-commerce sort of technology. Then that changed in the second wave around 2008, 2009, and we connected people. Facebook, the mobile phone made everything happen and so forth. So those technologies connected people. And then now, if you look at 2020, we are now in that third wave. Everything connects. Internet of things, people, 24/7, all the time, around the world. And this connectivity, which is called hyperconnectivity, I call an interaction field, is something that really, really can be important. And so what happened, what these economists back in 2014 won the Nobel Prize for, has now accelerated exponentially. And that's what is called, what I call the hyperconnectivity or an interaction field, where everything connects. And that creates new business models, entirely new ways of building companies.
Okay, so let's talk about those business models. Give us examples. How does this manifest? So
the early business models are called. They usually technology in the field were called multi-sided marketplaces. Then they were called platforms. An Airbnb or an Uber is a platform, because and it's two-sided, because there's one side is a rider and the other side is the driver. And in Airbnb, sometimes it's also called a digital ecosystem, because you have on one side people like me who rent out the spare room of my New York City flat here on one side, and on the other side you have travelers who come to New York. But then you also have a lot of services that are provided, cleaning services, insurance services and things like that. And that becomes an ecosystem. So multiple providers or partners. So those are the popular models, that have become that sort of like people have talked about. And I felt that you don't necessarily have to be any one of those, because they have their own challenges, if you will. I felt like, what if companies, real businesses, what if they adopt some of these business models, and if they think of their business in a new way? That sort of became my interest. So how does a real company evolve? How do you start a business without just being a platform? How do you build a real business that's not just the marketplace? That was my interest.
So I'm curious to know where things like competitive advantage or collaboration or brand live in this new kind of ecosystem.
See, I think that we live in a world for the last 20 or 30 years where innovation was in search of disruption, and everybody wanted to disrupt something. And then when these platforms developed, the idea was platforms are a way to disrupt these existing businesses. And I think we are living in a world today where this idea of disruption, has passed its expiration date. In my opinion, I love Clayton Christensen, and I love the idea of competition. Obviously, I'm a marathoner, so I'm always competing in front and behind 50,000 others who pass before me the finishing line. but I love the competition. But I don't think we can solve today, in the very day we live, that we solve some of the bigger problems that we all face, or consumer problems, by just through competition. But I think we shift and we have a new mindset, and the mindset goes from disruption and competition to collaboration, engagement, and participation. I think this is where value creation, and that's enabled through this hyper connectivity, that interaction field that has been created through technologies today.
So let's unpack that concept of shared value. Break that down for us. What does it look like, and give either real world or supposed examples of
look, I have plenty of examples in the book. And I like since I talk about interaction fields, I always like to talk about a field, namely an agricultural field. If you look at early in my chapters, I have a chapter on John Deere. John Deere has one of the best tractors that mow or harvest, with a combine, harvest the fields here in America in the most efficient and precise way. And John Deere is really competing with many other competitors, if you will. And there's something to that machine. Look, the 9X or 9T is called, the top of the line right now, is an $800,000 monster that has technology to the wazoo on it. There's screens. You can watch Netflix. You can actually watch Netflix and Hulu at the same time. You have so many screens, so the farmer never gets bored. If you have to drive that, they're actually even autonomous. Something we still try to figure out on the real streets, if you will. So it's a technological marvel. You can buy a few Rolls Royces for the amount that a farmer is driving down on that tractor. So technological wise, that's a really great. I could tell endlessly a story on this, but if you want to talk about shared value, the way John Deere can create shared value through that machine is the machine, the tractor can drop sensors on the field of farmers, and those sensors measure the soil condition, the health of the plant, the water irrigation that the plant gets, the plant gets, the kind of fertilizers that go on the plant, the kind of crop. They measure literally everything on a square foot, hopefully in the future at the square inch level. And if John Deere does that and drops those little sensors on the field, and farmers begin sharing the data from the field, and combine this with other farmers, which is happening already today on the John Deere open platform, it is called. If that happens, and John Deere adds to those data that come from the field almost on a weekly or daily basis on the conditions of the field across many farms, if that happens, then what happens is the value creation isn't just a marvelous $800,000 machine that John Deere sells. Then what John Deere does, it enables an interaction field among many others. If John Deere shares those data with fertilizer companies like Dow Crop Sciences or BASF or Syngenta from Switzerland, if they share it with crop companies like Monsanto, now owned by Bayer, let's say, if it shares with agricultural researchers and the Department of Agriculture, if you will, if everybody looks at the same data and the same interaction that takes place, a massive amount of data, they can learn how to optimize the field. Right now, the average productivity of an American farm is 3,500 kilos per hectare right now. That's really a lot. That's a lot more. Not any other country has as efficient farms as American farms. If you do the best you can, if you apply all the technologies, you could maybe increase it by 10%. That's not a lot. 10% will not help. If you apply what I'm talking about and building an interaction field, you can actually double the productivity to 7,850 kilo per hectare. And that will solve a huge amount of problems. Not only will it make the farms profitable, the farmers profitable, which is a real problem we have. It also makes them a lot more efficient. It also solves a lot of the problems in the farm the whole industry has. 40% of the water does not reach the plant. It's getting there leakage, there are other inefficiencies in the farming. So there's the most important resource we have is actually splurged, if you will, in the field. And most importantly, we all know that population is increasing. 40 million Americans still don't eat healthy food or don't have enough food in this country, USA. And when you think about it, if you can increase the healthy food production and supply and double that, you can actually solve a lot of problems that not only this country has, the world has, and for the future. So I think that this is what I call an interaction field, and what a long answer to the question of shared value, Jenny, because what John Deere creates value, but it's sharing out that value. It is not capturing the value, trying to and sort of capturing value and create shareholder value alone for itself. It enables an interaction field with a lot of participants.
And it ultimately benefits John Deere. I mean, at the end of the day, these are not nonprofit companies. They are for profit. They have to sell more product. Business growth is core. I mean, they have to.
Jenny, that's a good question. I'm often asked, but why would I do that? If I capture it by myself, then don't I get most of the money of that, the value of that? And that's the mindset we live in. That's the mindset, the imbecile mindset of disruption that we think about. We always think about, and what we have found, that when you build this kind of business models, that actually the whole market is increasing. Everybody benefits. It's not that you're competing. Everybody thinks of competition in this 0-1 game. My market share goes up, yours have to go down. And I think that's just a mindless kind of mindset.
So let's talk, obviously data is at the core of this. I mean, no surprise. Yeah. It's just, and what are the implications? We probably could spend a whole conversation on just this, but just what has to happen at the business level as far as the tech stack, data capabilities, what companies need to have in-house versus, how do they share data with their partner companies? Talk a little bit about that data piece.
Look, number one, this is not a technology question anymore. I know 5 years ago, I know 10 years ago, it was all about technology. But we are living in a world where technology, a number of technologies, cloud computing, I could go on, ML, AI, have come to maturity at the same time, so that technology is not the problem. 4 things you've got to do, in my opinion. That's what I write in the book. Number one, and this is where it really starts, you've got to know how you frame your business problem. Are you in the tractor business? Or like John Deere says now, we serve those close to the land. That's a very different mindset to begin with, versus we have the best tractors and our tractors are so much better than Cars' tractor, those are Germans, or Japanese tractors, or Mahindra from India, let's say. That we need to change that mindset and start with a framing questions. What is the problem we are really solving for at those levels? The share at the consumer level, at the industry level, because many of the problems are industry problems, and also at the society level. That's number one, framing. Number two, you need to design or create that interaction field. And there are 3 major decisions to that. How you create those interactions. Is this a transaction? I give you the tractor, you give me the money, $800,000 for a pup or something like that. Or how do you enable that interaction, a frequent interaction, what I call velocity. there's an architecture to that, and then there is a governance rules, how that interaction field operates. 3, you need to build it. You need to create some gravitational pull so that the people participate, consumers participate, farmers are willing to do that, and that's the third part. And 4th is you need to decide how you share out value. So those are the 4: framing, creating or designing, building, and then sharing. The problem is that today we don't do those things, and that's why I wrote the book.
So as you know, I spend an awful lot of time, have spent a lot of time with chief marketing officers and sort of living in that world, and talking to them so much about how their role has changed over the years, and how CMOs are driving so much more within their organizations than just brand messaging and advertising. Let's just focus on the CMO for a moment. You know, again, what are the implications of all this on just their directives and what they need to be thinking about in terms of the marketing priorities?
Yeah, absolutely. Think about how much. One of the thoughts in my world was, when I looked at these new business models, I said, is this just another business model and innovation? And there's so many other business models. Subscription is a business model, and then if that's what it's all about, there's some pricing models we call business models. And then I realized that it's actually not a business model. It's actually a fundamental change how you compete, how you build a business. And so it has a significant impact on CMOs. CMOs the traditional way has been to think about your brand, your purpose, what you stand for, and you compare yourself to competitors. When as a CMO, a CMO needs to lead the conversation about or strategic dialogue at an organization and says, what are we really solving for consumers? Which is our primary customers. How do we get them to become contributors and creating value? Who is creating value in the John Deere interaction field? Is it John Deere or is it the farmers? I think it's the farmers as well. So we need to fundamentally, as CMOs, change our mindset and say the consumer is not on the other side. It's not something we sell to, we market to, we position our brand purposes to. No, what we do is we need to figure out how we bring the consumer into the value creation, how they become an active participant, an active contributor to value creation. So wait a moment. If I put my flat up here on an Airbnb and make it available to travelers, who is creating value here for Airbnb? Is it Airbnb because they have a website, or is it me because I make available my beautiful terrace? It's not that beautiful terrace with my room here. We all live in modest surroundings in New York, but that's the point. So I am actually a contributor to that. So the whole role of a CMO, I'm in charge of understanding consumers, I'm in charge of marketing to consumers, is all fundamentally wrong now. In this new world, it is, how do I engage with that consumer? How do I become part? How do I bring that consumer into the value creation? It's sort of, it's almost the consumer is becoming part of your thing. So that's the CMO. That's one part of the CMO. The CMO always thinks of one company or one brand and positions the company or the brand relative to other companies.
Or even against other companies.
Against other companies.
Yeah.
But now the whole branding works differently, because even the competitors become your partners and participants in value creation. So you are no longer just, you need a brand, an ecosystem, an entire interaction field. And you need to create value for each one of them. The whole idea of customer centricity is bankrupt in this new context, because it's not just the customer. The customer, you're not focusing on customer. You're not centric to the customer. The customer is part of your value creation business model. and of your interaction field. And your customer is not the one that you're separating with from the money, and for your product or service. The customer is actually every other participant in the action field. If John Deere wants to do this right, they need to have a value proposition for Monsanto. They need to have a value proposition for Syngenta, for all of those participants. And if they don't create value. So it's the CMO becomes an incredibly powerful part of the organization of almost orchestrating a value proposition, a shared value creation that the CMO today, the tools we have, simply the CMO doesn't have those tools. We never talked about that.
I love how you're disrupting just some long made assumptions here. So just some incredibly mind-blowing concepts for sure. I love it. It's interesting to hear you talk about, CMOs owning the customer. I mean, arguably, and I'm getting to know this now, obviously, in additional conversations with other C-suite executives. I mean, CIOs believe, they would emphatically say they own the customer relationship. CFOs would claim the same for different reasons. I mean, I think that customer ownership certainly has just now, it bleeds throughout the organization, or it should at least, and it isn't an issue, it isn't a problem per se, but how C-suite executives work together and how much they're in alignment over these concepts, I'm sure has to be critical. Do you have any thoughts around internally, how C-suite executives need to think about finally breaking down silos, or coming up with new processes, or coming up with new common language, within the organization, such that there's true alignment and productivity?
So here's the thing. Yesterday, I had a conversation with Tom Achello, who is the Chief Creative Officer at Vivaldi, and Tom and Richard and I. Richard is our Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer, and we discussed about these things. And he says, you know what? The problem, Tom says, the problem we have is that we all talk about competitive advantage. And what you said, we compare ourselves to others. BMW compares themselves to Mercedes, and Mercedes compares themselves to Audi, and now they compare all of each other to Tesla. And our mindset as a CMO and our mindset, the C-suite mindset is, we are better. We are different. We have more technology. We are this. We have more. We have more digitized. With the CIO says we have. The CMO will say we have the best agency network, and so forth and so forth. But that work only works in the traditional old mindset of pushing out products and services. And what I find interesting is when in the conversation we had yesterday. So Tom says, Erich, it is not about competitive advantage. It is about collaborative advantage. So how do we create? So the CMO needs to engage its fellow C-suite executives and create a collaborative advantage. I think that's a big idea. And I think this is where we need to start thinking about it. And it begins again with a framing. If the CMO talks about ROI relative to other campaigns in this industry that he runs with his agency and celebrates the Effie Awards because he has an efficient award for whatever in its category, then they don't think the way consumers think. Consumers don't think in categories. Consumers don't think in industries. I don't compare BMW, Mercedes, or Audi. I just buy one because, and by the way, it's not that big of a deal. You buy it in a lease and it's, you change it anyway. So I think that if you think about in the action fields, you say like, what am I solving for? And you're not solving for buying another car. You're solving for mobility. If in agriculture, you're not solving for selling more tractors. You need to start thinking about solving for the problems of the farmers, and that is making profits per acre and productivity of the farm, to make the money to have a living. So I think we need to fundamentally, and it has to come from the CMO, but it has to engage everybody in the organization and create, again, as Tom Achello says, collaborative or collaborative advantage, not competitive advantage.
I love that. Fantastic. So many fantastic sound bites here, Dave.
There's plenty, yes, and we've got lots of action in the comments, as you would imagine, with these points. First of all, can I say, in the comments, if you're watching this just now, please just let us know where you're from. Just type in where you're from so that we can get a little bit of an idea of the geographic distribution of this stream right now. That would be nice. So we've got a question here that from Paul W. Does the interaction field behave as a transaction catalyst, guiding, augmenting, and exciting social valuation?
See, I think that the way you think of value, of what is the value of something, is in the old days it used to be the tangible assets of the firm. And then some intangible assets such as the brand, and that generated you a cash flow that you can discount over several years, and the free cash flow multiplied out becomes sort of like your value or your market cap. That's how you evaluated a company in a traditional way. When you now look at valuation of a firm or a brand has to do with what I call in the book interaction velocity. It's the quantity, how frequent you interact with consumers. Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it once a year? That's a lot less valuable because you don't create value through infrequent interactions, but also the quality, how much sharing takes place, and to your social valuation, how much consumers actually engage and share. Vivaldi, my company that we all sort of own together here in New York and around the world, we call this social currency. And so a big part of valuation becomes actually those interactions, and those are in many cases social interactions. In other cases, like in the farm world, it is less social, it is more data, analytics, and technology. But in many cases, it is powered by social interactions. Alibaba is an example in the book. GoPro is an example in the book, and some others.
Mm-hmm. I've got a really lovely question here that's trying to stick a fork in the hornet's nest.
That is a question for Jenny, not for me.
So it says, we've got here, there's no industry creating more creative or strategic waste than the advertising and consulting industries. The shoemaker has the worst shoes, so they say. How could the interaction field apply to our industry? Oh, sandals even. I mean, if you had Crocs, you'd really have proved something there, Erich.
Hey. I'm fashionable. Okay, what's the question?
So how can the interaction field apply to the industries of consulting and advertising to try and make them less wasteful, I guess?
You know what happens is that the industries that we talk about primarily are very transactional, and we all hate the pitch process in consulting. You know, you get an RFP, then the client will tell you, oh, we have 15 other companies like you invited, and 2 or 3 of them are our incumbents that we already work with. We know them very well. And then we go through a pitch process. It's basically a transactional business facilitated by procurement. And so it works in advertising as much as in consulting. And I think that in order to enable an interaction field company, in order to enable these platforms for clients, in order to actually build across industries, let's see, a mobility solution, or I think the services that an agency provides should be, in my opinion, should not be provide or procured on a transactional basis, but on an interactional basis. That means, when we work on a new project, usually they give us a dump on all the market research they have done on the brand, on the innovation, about successful and not, and so forth, and the company documents and so forth. And that's a transaction. I think what would be the value, in my opinion, if you would invite an agency, a creative agency or performance marketing agency or a consulting firm like Vivaldi is, and actually engage them in the data and the interaction flow that exists and help manage that. I think that's where value creation is. And you know what? It's already happening. I mentioned John Deere in the example. There are ag tech companies that work on those data. So rather than coming up with some widget that ag tech does and get some ABC financing or something, they actually work in collaboration with John Deere on those data. So, and everybody benefits in some way. So I think these things happen already in some parts, but not as part of a larger industry, I think, at this time at least.
So actually, could I maybe sort of throw this question as well to Jenny, if you don't mind, Jenny? I mean, you've interviewed so many CMOs and CEOs, and you've got your finger on the pulse of what's happening in marketing, consulting, advertising space. Have you seen any sort of moves towards anything that's maybe more platform-based or collaborative within this space? Or can you see it affecting any behavior at the moment?
Sure. I mean, obviously procurement came in after 2008, we saw that huge influence on so many things, and certainly on CMOs and their decision-making choices around this stuff. But I think CMOs are realizing, and the agency world is responding, and consultancies are as well, that we used to talk about way back in the day, best of breed, which was sort of this concept where you could think about, I need to bring together the best of the best data scientist, the best creative writer, the best sort of big thinker, and I think we've obviously seen work go to much more to project based as opposed to full ARR relationships. And I think CMOs that I have talked to, of course, have been driving for years now this ability to create sort of these bespoke teams of talent and resources that work for their brands. I mean, that's facilitating a lot of collaboration, I think, on the agency and consultancy side, based on their own individual needs, certainly. So
I also think that the current solution, going in-house, building in-house agencies or in-house consulting, I think it's a flawed model. I think that, we think of it as a dichotomy. And I think that there are good things for the outside agency, good things for the inside agencies. And I think that just solving it one way or the other, I think it's a 0-1 solution that doesn't make any sense. I think that it's much more building that in the action field. I think that what Jenny talks about, I think that's where the smart CMOs actually are doing the right things, in my opinion.
Yeah, great. We've got another question here from Andrew. Do you have specific advice for CMOs in ultra-competitive industries like hotels, grocery retail, as to how to best embrace the shared value concept? So they might be more about extracting value than sharing value.
Well, and can I also just ask, I'm sorry, Erich, just to build on that question too. I mean, those specific industries referenced, I mean, we haven't really gotten into specifics around how the pandemic and how the specifics of 2020 have really severely impacted a lot of what we're talking about. And certainly those industries, hotels, grocery retail, I mean, they have seen so much upending in their industries particularly. But yes, they're always ultra competitive historically. But I wonder if you could also layer on the sort of the new challenges that they face now, especially in 2020 and beyond.
Yeah, I think that the pandemic has made it clear that it is not about us versus them. I think that the one liner that I have now accustomed to is nobody does it alone. And if you look at a good comparison, I have this in my book in comparing, looking at Alibaba in particular, the Chinese retailer. Sometimes it's compared to Amazon, but it's not really comparable. in many ways. Alibaba is actually in the Alibaba world. The small retailers, very, very small family stores, one room, small, very, very small square footage, is actually thriving in the Alibaba world. In the Amazon world, it's a source of disruption, putting them out of business, booksellers, for example. And in the Alibaba world, an example what they do is in terms of this shared value creation. Alibaba has software like this cloud software, just like Amazon, the AWS software, the cloud software that enables the commerce part. Yeah, that's very expensive for everyone. A small Chinese retailer family business, one family can't really afford these high-end technologies. But Alibaba has a solution that it makes available to those small retailers for free. The small retailers, there are 6 million of those small retailers in China. And those small retailers actually get used and for the first time actually track inventory, if they learn a bit of making the small stores efficient, share those data with Alibaba. And when the small retailer grows to a certain size, Alibaba uses the knowledge and in order to upsell them to the solution, the expensive solution. But the idea with Alibaba is to create a shared value, not for also mainstream retailers, so for the traditional small retailers. They introduce payment solutions, Alipay. That China was much more of a cash solution. So in order for these small retailers to make some money beyond just cash, is they introduce Alipay, so with a mobile phone. Logistically, small retailers, it was very local. They only could sell within the neighborhood or within the city because the logistics system didn't exist. So Alibaba built a Kaeno, is it called? It's a large logistics system where a small retailer, small family storefront can actually sell across the entire China. So I think that again, that you see sort of the tenor and the spirit, shared value creation can actually work. And to your point, to that question from Andrew, is that you can actually benefit, especially in this pandemic, the retailers that are sort of in an extremely difficult situation on Main Street.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, I think this is the point where we wrap it all up. And I want to say, Jenny, thank you so much for joining us and for asking such fantastic questions and probing Erich to get the good stuff out. And Erich, thank you again for coming on and sharing your wisdom and your understanding so generously. You, the audience, thank you for watching. Thank you to everyone that's put things into the comments. But from us, I want to say thank you very much. Go and buy the book, and we will see you back on here very soon. Thank you so much again, Jenny. Thank you, Erich.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you so much for the questions.
Thank you so much.